Hello, everyone. My name is Jane, and I'm the logistics lead at Toronto Outdoor Art Fair. I'd like to welcome everyone to our panel for the 2020 Jurors Picks. Today, I'm joined with Lee Petrie, Exhibitions Director at the Gladstone Hotel and one of our jurors for the 2020 year. Today, Lee will chat with 4 of our artists that our jurors felt stood out and take you deeper into the process. Micah Adams, Keith Eager, Cal Manser, and Charlie's Nguyen. Lee?
Thanks so much, Jane, and welcome to all of the artists who are joining us for this evening's conversation. I'm really delighted to be speaking with you tonight. So let's get started. All of you have participated in the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair in the past, and in some cases with Cal and Micah, multiple years. I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you really love about the show and why you want to participate. Micah, let's start with you.
That's a good question. I like doing the outdoor show for the unfiltered audience that you end up getting in an outdoor fair. There's a lot of people who might just be walking their dog, as well as people going to the fair specifically to see art. So I kind of like to use it as an open studio and just show my things that I'm making in progress or finished things and how I make things, and hope to surprise people along the way.
And Cal, you're also a longtime veteran of the show. What brings you back year after year?
Well, actually, the first time I did it was 1991.
Wow.
So, yeah, so that is almost 30 years. I did it straight out of art school. I went to school in Texas. When I came back, I'd never, growing up in Toronto, I've never heard of the show. So the first time I ever saw it or had any awareness of it, I was in it. And I was gone for a long time. I started doing it again 2008. And it's similar to Micah. You're in your studio all the time, and artists tend to be fairly solitary. We're not, I'm sure people collaborate. I don't happen to do that, so I'm by myself. So it's nice to be out, talk to, I like to call them the civilians, and see what they have to say. And you get the most honesty and the most truth in terms of critique. Somebody doesn't like something, they may not say it to your face, but if you follow them down the aisleway, they don't know you're following them, you get a lot of information. So I do it similarly. You make sales, you meet people. I've gotten some significant things out of that show, but honestly, at this point in my career, I do it kind of hang out with my artist buddies.
Oh, that's great. And how about you, Keith? What draws you to the show?
Okay, for me, for someone who's starting out as a professional artist, it's almost the primary opportunity to make direct sales, make connections with collectors and galleries. It's almost something that is a must do starting out. Because it's a good platform, it's a good launching pad towards other opportunities. A lot of friends of mine do these shows like TOAF and Artist Project and other outdoor shows, but I think TOAF for the outdoor shows, it's the best one that I've been to, the best one that I've done. It has the best balance of quality, of curation, of art for art's sake, as well as the commercial sales aspect, and then the direct contact with the public. And it's a juried show. It's it has a large amount of prestige, as well as being a community event, like what Kai and Mika was saying.
Yeah, I think it really brings together a diverse audience, and with something like 110,000 people visiting the show every year, you can't beat that volume of connection. Charlize, how about for you? What brings you back to the show?
For me, I consider myself as new to the show. Last year was my first time participating in it. Some of my work were quite personal, so I was kind of hesitant, but I was actually genuinely really surprised as the audience reaction to it, and they got so much more interested in the story. So they always kind of mirror what the story is and what the actual item is. But I was also very happy that just to see a fellow artist struggling or fighting or showing the work just like I am, right? So it has a better and bigger community base at where you actually feel like you belong somewhere. So for me, that's why I come back.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah, it's nice to hear about those community connections and getting the feedback, especially when you're starting out. Although, you know, Cal, you've been doing it for so many years, but it seems like it doesn't get old for you.
No, well, I have other people that do a lot of hard work. So I kind of just show up. They help set up, and I have a bit of a reputation because I'm never in the booth and I don't wear my name tag, so no one knows where I am. And I really like my wife tends to be in the booth with me, so I just go socialize. I have a great time.
But now we know what you look like, and if you're following us, we're tipped off.
I'm not quite Banksy, but I'm trying.
You're actually wearing a mask tonight. I'm wondering if you could each talk to us about your artistic background and how you came to the practice that you're currently engaged with, and if maybe you started off in one material and shifted to something else, or one type of imagery and evolved over time. Cal, you're on screen. Tell us, you've been at this, I think, the longest. What did you start when you went to university in Texas? What was your practice then?
Well, I actually went there as a baseball player. I got scouted when I was in Toronto in high school. So at that point, the best description I can give you is like I was the jock dude in the back of art class in high school sleeping. I don't come from a creative family. It's actually a military family. So I had no aspirations or thoughts whatsoever. I was just into sports. And so when I got down to the University of Texas, which was a big baseball school, I didn't make that team. And in order to stay in school, I had to pick a major. And I don't read so good. So I was like, I can do art. And that was it. Like it was just a spur of the moment at the registrar's office. I picked it, and I think it was, looking back now, I mean, I graduated in 1990, so it's 30 years ago. And looking back now, I think it was an interesting decision. I didn't want to be told what to do. So art, right? You don't know this when you're young. And luckily for me, not coming from an art background, none of my friends are artists that I grew up with, I kind of didn't have any of the art rules either. There's lots of rules, as you guys all know, in the art world. Galleries or curators or whatever. So I didn't know any of that stuff at all. My approach is entirely competitive, coming from, I ended up signing that year with a AA team in Austin. So while I was in art school, I was playing professional baseball for a year. So I was going back in this like uber, as they say now, cisgender machismo environment at the stadium to art school, which is much more flexible. So my approach became like an athlete. I was going to make the biggest paintings. I was going to make the most paintings. I had no concerns about being good at it, or people's opinions didn't matter to me, which it turns out was helpful. I didn't know. My feelings, you couldn't hurt my feelings because I grew up in the military environment. So blah, blah, blah. I ended up in New York. I was showing in New York for a lot of years. So I've shown in Toronto a lot. And I agree with Keith. I've done major outdoor shows, like in Ann Arbor, Michigan. There's a major show. I've done that show. I've done shows in different parts of the States. And Toronto, that show in Toronto, that is the best show that I've been in terms of a juried outdoor show, in terms of quality, for sure. There's no doubt. And at this point, you know, I do a lot of stuff. I do stuff with buildings and stuff, and my wife runs my studio full time. So I have a lot of help. And like I said earlier, I come to that show to see all the art. I think Charlize is right. For me, it's less of a networking thing, because I guess after 30 years, I've got a network. So it's more about like seeing what the young artists are doing. That's my favorite part, honestly, when the student section used to be there. And I bought lots of work from recent people. I like to see they seem to be the freest. They're not corrupted like me by money. So.
But turning to,
so they're doing good stuff, you know.
The younger artists in the group. So Keith, you're just starting out. Have you always worked in painting, or did you know that's what you wanted to do, or have you worked with other media as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started out my path of post-secondary study looking at illustration and animation, printmaking and painting. I kind of bounced around different places studying. And then I wrote, just before this, I wrote my notes of sort of my path of how I got to my current body of work. Because the way I saw it was, I was studying like observational drawing, observational painting, and I was studying illustration. So it was this sort of in the moment experience, capturing what was around me, and then like the creation of narratives. And those were two separate practices for me. And then I started showing at these outdoor shows after graduating. And I before that, I developed like a body of work that was looking at my own life. It was autobiographical. It was sort of documentary, somewhat reportage. That was what I developed during my thesis at OCAD. I developed that work, and then I chose to start doing outdoor shows. I didn't know where to go after thesis. I was like, okay, I'm going to start doing these shows. That's what my friends are doing. That's how we go about starting as painters. And I went back and I regressed into this like sentimental painter's painting, where it was like, this is a still life, this is a landscape, this is a figure, this is a plein air. Because I thought that was what was commercial, and that was what people would buy at these outdoor events. It turned out I was completely wrong. I did 2 shows and sold nothing. It was just full of, you know, still life and plein air and everything. But the second show that I did, I had the giant painting of the car fire, which I showed at TOAF last year, and that one it got a lot more attention than the other more ordinary figure studies, which you would see at any art school. And that was a piece that I'd started at OCAD before I decided to go back and do the painter's kind of painting. So I then found that for me, it was a matter of doing narrative painting, which I always wanted to do, but also looking at my own life and my own surroundings. And then this year, I've started to combine press photos with the narrative painting, with my own life, sort of collaging and taking different elements. And I started listening to the news a lot more, so I'm incorporating like news events into my artwork, which is a trip, because a lot of the stuff that I was painting starting in January, I was going back to like photos that I had of the G20 protests in Toronto and riots, and now I look at the news of what's happening in the States, and it's all coming together, everything that's happening around us and the stuff that I've been thinking about.
And I'm gonna ask you more about that.
Yeah,
It's
a really bizarre feeling to be there.
Yeah, I think you're.
Just so you guys know, I'm in the States right now. This is my studio. I'm in Pittsburgh.
Oh, hey Pittsburgh, my home away from home. Micah, what was your artistic training? How did you come to your current practice?
Sort of, I didn't plan to go to art school or university at all. I just kind of fell into it. Were
you also going to be a baseball player?
I wasn't going to be a baseball player, but I had no idea what I was going to do. But I ended up taking some courses in CEGEP in Montreal and Quebec. And then from there, I started to like it and find my path a little bit more, and decided to go to NASCAD. And then so I did that, and I graduated and was kind of committed to being an artist before I finished. And then I ended up in Toronto. I had some friends who were here, and that was one of the first things that I did, was do the outdoor show. And I remember it was just, you try to just do as much as you can, or that you have to make your own path a lot of times as an artist. Sometimes it's hard to know what your own personal path is. So you try a lot of different things. So I was applying to exhibitions, or trying to reach out to galleries, and doing these fairs. And while I was in university, similarly to how I got there, I was making work in sculpture or drawing, but everything kind of got smaller and smaller. And until someone recommended I should try the jewelry studio. And that was a good place. There are much more precise tools in that workshop. So then when I finished school, I was able to get a residency at the Harbourfront Centre in Toronto. So that was sort of a stepping off point for me to start as a professional, not a student anymore.
And I think that's where so many artists get their start. Charlize, I know that you are also a resident at Harbourfront. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are now. And maybe what Harbourfront meant to you as well.
Yeah, I'm still at the Harbourfront. I'm in my last year. So the whole program is renew every year. So we got about 3 years. My background wise, I actually started out in architecture. And growing up, that was something my parents like, oh, that's not decent. Like, that's
Architects.
And then, but I think mainly just because I wasn't drawn to anything else. And I thought for some reason, architect, I get to sit there and draw all day. Like, that's all I'm going to do. And then, but when I started studying it and actually looking, I'm like, oh, I have to do more than that. So I kind of, drawn away from it, but then I did work a bit. But then eventually I found out that through my parents that I'm actually the second or third generation in craft, what we consider the craft field. In my country in Vietnam, to my grandparent and my parent, they just see that as a job. Like, like you weaving, that's a job. Like, that's what you do. But in Canada and Western world and Europe, that's an actual field, like a craft field. So that's when I decided to go back into craft, and I studied jewelry, and which I thought, okay, I'm just gonna do it and see how it goes. But when I was doing jewelry, I was actually very drawn to getting it perfect, because there's a lot of science in metal and the way perfection is, and the side scale that I'm going from architecture really large. Most of the time imaginary, because it takes a long time for a project to be built, to something I can fabricate within a day and very tiny. So it's like that kind of contrast sort of like pull me into the world. Eventually I go on to OCAD, and where I wanted to explore much more beyond jewelry. And I took a lot of classes there, and then that's how eventually I led to Harbourfront, which is where I'm at. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Actually, Charlize, I want to ask you a little bit more about your jewelry work, which will be showing at the fair. So to me, the forms in your jewelry are really organic, and the pieces almost resemble leaves or bark, and they're really in some cases fitted to the curves of the body. So I was wondering where those forms come from, if you take inspiration from natural materials. And then I was also curious about whether you start in any sort of 2D process, like do you gather things and make sketches, or do you immediately start to work with your hands molding a non-precious material to test out forms? Talk to us a little bit more about that sort of idea to object process for you.
So that collection is my negative space collection, and a lot of time on photos or even on show, because the size of it, you don't actually see the details. So the pattern you see is actually, it is organic, but it's not of tree or nature. It's actually our human skin. Yeah, so it's very specifically identified with the wearer. So for all of those pieces are very specific to one person. It has that sort of like ideas of telling a story that well, for me, I use the body as a journey, in a sense that as you grow old or something happened to us in trauma, our body reacts to it. And when our body reacts to it, there's symptoms, there's effects. Like if you get hurt on your skin, it'll show. So that's what it's kind of, you can see in the work when you actually see it in person. So unless you actually there and see the object, a lot of time I just get, which is why this is kind of fun at the outdoor when I meet the audience. They come up with the biggest idea or the different idea. I'm just like, I never thought of that, but yeah, but I can see how that looks like that. But that's how they get the stories. I start always very much with analogs. So it's 2D. So I actually mold pre-mold to my body or the client I work for or the object I work for. Some of the pieces actually tell a story of loss. So the person's no longer there, but it was the connection between me and that person. So therefore, the skin pattern retain our connection although they passed. So I would mold that, and then I would reform it in metal forming, and then I would do prototype, and then I would cast it. Depend on what I'm looking for. Sometimes it's not even cast; it's hand form, but in different way. So it depends on the piece, and every time it's different. So it's never really the same.
Interesting. I mean, we always feel like when we're purchasing directly from the artist that we really do have a piece of you, but your work takes it that next step, that if it's a mold of your own skin, we really are taking a piece of you. Keith, you started to talk about this, about your process of working from the news. And so I did want to ask you how you choose your sources, how you edit those scenes, if you create scenes, or if you're always working like from so-called documentary material. Tell us a little bit more about your images and how you choose what you're going to paint.
Right. Yeah. So it's both now. So I have some older pieces that were verbatim from press photos, but then you start to think like, okay, if anyone actually finds out who I am and people actually start buying my paintings, I'm going to be owing royalties to whoever took those images, right? Like they're not really my images. They're my paintings of someone else's images. And you can do that with older work. Like you can paint from public domain images, which I've done before and I'm still doing. But I mean, something that's a great joy for me is like making my own narrative, combining different images from different sources, some that are my own photos, some that are found photos or press photos, and collaging them into a narrative painting. Because there's a lot of great, powerful imagery out there that, you know, I can choose to recreate in my own way, or I can choose to inspire me to make something completely new from. And I'm kind of in this in-between space right now where I like to work with some found imagery and I like to make some of my own imagery. I could hold up a piece if you want. I don't know if that's
sure. Why not?
That's within the. Yeah. So for instance, with this painting, so the woman standing on the box, the wind-up girl. So that's a performer in Kensington Market. I captured that photo, and then the background is this ruined square in Ukraine from the Maidan Revolution. So I like to keep press clippings. Like I keep these incredible images that affect me in some way. And right now I'm combining them with my own imagery. And I'm starting to work again more directly with press imagery because I want to respond to what's happening in the world right now in a really direct way, just get something out there. But when I have more time, the creation of my own narrative and my own composition and ideas is really compelling to me, and it's something that I've always wanted to push myself in that direction for it's almost like you're making a movie or you're making like a Norman Rockwell painting or something like that. That's one of the goals that I've had since childhood. But then to respond to documentary and to respond to memory is like a more adult notion. Like it's one that I've grown into, like looking at my own life and looking at documentary. You know, they're two different sources. One is like it's a documentary that you created, like your own photograph or your own memory, and then the other one being something that you saw in the news, which in a way you experienced it because you're sitting there consuming this media and being affected by it. So I find it interesting, like looking internally at things that are like really directly affecting my own life. So like I'll refer to again, the car fire painting is something that I witnessed in in my backyard that was like, I came home and there was a burning car. But then, you know, something like a protester that I see on the news, it affects me emotionally because I have the memories of like being a child and going to protest with my parents and then going to protest on my own, but also I see what other people are doing around the world, and then I'm affected by that and feel compelled to paint it too.
Yeah, it's an interesting combination of, I like how you talk about it as collage, that it's not physically a collage, but you're collaging images together and memories. And I mean, it manifests in a totally different way, Micah, in your work, where you're doing a form of collage with the coins. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. I mean, I think a lot of people probably wonder, like, where do you get those coins from? And so how do you go about piecing those together and gathering your source material?
Well, I get the coins from everywhere I can. You know, sometimes I find them on the street, like old pennies. The longer I've been doing it, I've had a lot of people give me their old foreign coins, which is really nice because I always end up finding things I've never seen before. But yeah, so I get some things from eBay, some things from junk stores, from all over.
And then what happens to the pieces that are left over?
I keep those too.
Yeah, the negative space could prompt something else.
Yeah, sometimes. Like I have a big jar. I've been cutting out the leaves from pennies, and I have an old peanut butter jar that's filled with just not the leaves, but the leafless pennies. But it's starting to get full now, so I need to find a new jar. But I keep all those, and then they end up using them for other things. Like for a while, I started cutting up text and letters from around the edges of coins. So I went back into my old stash of already cut up coins to take more things from those.
Interesting. I mean, in thinking about that kind of precision assembly, Cal, your work requires that, although on we're going from the scale, the size of a coin, up to something that is not captured by my wingspan. So your work is assembled with multiple pieces of precisely cut acrylic, and then I think you also sometimes do paint into the surface.
Yeah.
Maybe you could take us through the process. Do you start with a sketch of shapes or color combinations? Do you work analog or digitally, or at what point does it flip from one mode to another?
I don't have any sketches, or the shapes are kind of, I repeat them over and over again. It's a series of shapes that I started to develop when I was living in New York. I was there when 9/11 happened. I saw the people falling out of the building and the aircraft hitting the building. So I was in Brooklyn. So those images seared in my brain. And over the years, to try to exorcise those demons, I started developing, like the one back there, you can kind of see something tilting. So ideas of things that were tilting or crushing was in there, you know. And I'm not a drawer. My degree was in painting, and I was a painter for a lot of years. But around 2008, I was back in Toronto from New York, and I had a show at actually Engine Gallery years ago. And I started painting backwards on pieces of clear plexiglass, right? So painting in, you know, like glass painting almost.
Right.
And that made me a little cuckoo. So I didn't want to do that anymore. But this plexiglass was interesting to me. That developed, and just the idea was just born out of kind of a simple thought, right? Paint is a lie. In other words, a sunset beautifully painted is yellow paint. I mean, it's paint, right? It's beautifully done. I'm a big fan of Turner, for example. So, but I wasn't a good enough painter to do that. So I was like, well, how can I create light without having to learn how to paint that well? And so the reflection of light, the bouncing of it inside of a plexiglass box was born out of that. lack of talent, I guess. And the precision of it comes from, people talk about perfectionism. I'm really not a perfectionist. I let a lot of things go that are imprecise. It's just that my perception of precision is probably a little bit different, right? It's a hollow box, and it's a hollow plexiglass container, and inside that container there are different bits of plexiglass, different thicknesses, glued into almost like an architectural model. And then that hollow container that has now a little world inside of it, some of that world is painted with acrylic paints. Some of the plexiglass is at angles, so things that look like they're fading away are actually physically moving away from you inside of the box. It's not an illusion of something fading away. It's actually a thing that's going away. It's been cut at an angle. So, and then sort of the thing that capped that idea was a lot of research. I did a lot of research on optics and diffusion and all kinds of stuff out of Germany, and found a commercial material, and that's the skin on the front, and that diffuses everything in that box in a very, it's not frosted plexiglass, it's got nanoparticles. I won't get into it, but it diffuses any light going into that box in a very specific way. It's actually a randomized diffusion. So a lot of times, even at the outdoor show, people ask me if they're plugged in or if they're lit up,
Mm-hmm.
and they're not. What's happening is I have prism-like clear acrylic pieces inside that you don't really see, that are capturing the light coming into the box and then bouncing it up through the edges, and they're hitting things. So it's a combination of controlling whatever ambient light happens to be around inside the box and paint. And then the surface, which is completely flat, I was thinking a lot about screens. I guess 12 years ago, we're looking at a screen right now. So the idea of this projection of thoughts onto a flat plane with no texture. And I'd come out of 20 years of making really thick paintings with trowels, the exact opposite. So I wanted it to look like it was a machine-made, computer-generated image, but it's totally analog. I use my hands. I have some sophisticated machines. I have a CNC machine and table saws and stuff. But in general, even the CNC machine, which is for those who don't know, it's a computer-controlled cutting machine used in industry. I don't actually write programs. I use a joystick and I cut things just by sight. So it's very old. It's very traditional in the sense as I'm taking materials, I'm cutting them, I'm gluing them, and I'm manipulating them. But I definitely follow some sort of Donald Judd's ideas about removing the hand as much as possible, even though the thoughts are in there. That's what I'm trying. The new work that I'm doing now, which is over there, that's poured epoxy that I've also carved. But now I've taken the skin away. So now you're going to start seeing the guts.
So are those works textural, or are they still flat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the textural. They're three-dimensional. I mean, they're fairly. It's a whole series of ideas around rice patties. The ideas
Mm-hmm.
of what do we call those again? Sorry, thank you. I keep forgetting. A lot of work in here. Ideas of terraces.
Mm-hmm.
I spent some time in Malaysia, and I was born actually in Bangladesh. So I've spent time in the east part of the world. My wife is from the Philippines. So I was just kind of looking at topographical images of Japanese rice paddies and these sort of flat layers out of a mountain. So I'm kind of doing that now. And the colors that are in there there's no paint involved. It's all pigmented industrial epoxy. So I just sort of pour a big blob, and then I just cut it away again. So I don't know there's a lot of randomness there. It's like three-dimensional Pollock, but with architecture forced upon it.
It seems like an interesting progression from textural paintings in your early days to these dimensional yet ultimately completely flat works, and then a shift back into something that's more organic and textured.
Well, it's just my life cycle, right? you know, I kind of started out as a 15-year-old, pretty textured, and things got smoothed out after a while, and now I just turned 55, so I'm kind of been doing the, you know, I sold my first painting in 1988, so I haven't made a living my whole life. I, you know, made a living starting maybe 8, 9, 10 years ago. I've done other things. I've been a CEO of my own company in New York, so I've done other kind of corporate-y stuff. The art was always there, and now it's like what Keith was saying about what's happening with the protests. I just wanted to, you know, we're here, we're seeing it. It's happening here in Pittsburgh, and of course, I had a studio in Brooklyn for a while. It's happening with my friends in New York.
Mm-hmm.
I happen to be a person of color, but you know, I can't begin to understand the complexity of what's happening. But what I can do is document what I'm seeing in my own way. So the new work, I've been in Pittsburgh for about a year, and I'm here for another year, and then I'm back to Toronto. I have a space in Toronto and a space here. So the political climate finds into the work in ways that I can't seem to control. I think for artists, we can all talk to what we do. I think everybody's very sophisticated from what I'm hearing, but a lot of times I think also, I honestly have no idea what I'm doing, right? So it kind of, you know, I guess we're at different stages. I'm at the stage of my career where I'm like a little kid. I'm in my studio 7 days a week. My wife, who manages the studio and gets upset that I'm like fooling around with stupid stuff in the corner when I should be working on a commission for somebody, don't care. Those days are past me. So I just, I'm much closer to just playing. I just play, and I don't really even edit. I don't think about what's good or bad, or I don't think about what's going to sell, or she does, and that's great, fine. But you got to make the work for yourself. I think we all do, and I get asked by, you know, I've given lectures and been asked by a lot of people, like, what do we need to do to get to the next level, right? Make a living or whatever. And I always say, like, you just got to make your own work. And of course, you have to see the trends. What Keith was saying, right? You do a body of work, you hope to sell it, it doesn't sell, you look around, you make some adjustments. That's a 1,000-year-old process. I mean, that's what the Renaissance artists did. They made adjustments, right? If you want to make a living from it, you have to be a little bit flexible. But yeah, the best work that I see, including the artists that are here, it's totally pure work. I think, not to go on, but to lecture, but this idea of commercial, right? I'm a commercial artist. I have a fine art degree, but I make art for money. I don't not make art for money. Meaning, if I make something, even if, like these pieces up here, those are experiments, but after you've done it for a while, there are people looking to buy your experiments, right? Which is what happened. Mm-hmm. We've sold a bunch already. So I wasn't thinking about that. And that's just how you build your career. You do it, you keep doing it, and your language gets so consistent that you kind of can't, how do I say this? We're Canadian, so I'll say it in the Canadian way, not an American way. You kind of can't screw it up. Like if you do it enough times over and over again, it's like being a chef, right? Like you go to a chef that's been cooking for 30 years, he's probably not even paying attention when he's cooking, and it's going to be fine.
I think that's actually really heartening advice for the younger generation. I wanted to loop back to something you mentioned in connecting to Keith's work about reflecting on current events and current times. So Keith, you've talked about your work as exploring themes of destruction and masculinity, and those themes I think are seeming particularly timely and relevant. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about how you're exploring those themes and how you're looping that into what you're seeing in the world around you right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the image database that I've been building is around that. I have this whole double life. I have this whole hobby outside of art, which is practicing MMA and jiu-jitsu. And if I'm honest, like half of the time that I've spent at home during COVID has been building a home gym so I can practice in my basement. And I feel like that's another series that's in the back of my head, is one that focuses specifically on masculinity and on combat sports and some of the more destructive and self-destructive aspects of that. I've been thinking about that for a long time, but yeah, I mean, right now I'm looking a bit more at kind of broader systemic issues. I mean, when I look at, I have another painting that I've been working on, which is it's combining an image that I took of a fire in my neighborhood, this destroyed storefront, and then there's protesters and rioters dancing around a police car at the G20 protest on Bay Street. So something like that is different because there's a destructive element, but there's a creative element too. It's like, it's not necessarily around destruction and masculinity. It's more of like a visceral feeling of rebellion and almost like a critique of capitalism and neoliberalism, which I didn't think about when I started it. I just thought, hey, this is great. They're dancing on this police car. I can combine this with an image that I took of a storefront that has been destroyed. It goes along with it. But man, now I think about it more, and how loaded an image of destruction around a riot is, right? Like the term riot versus the term rebellion, they mean different things, and like different people will say them. So, you know, a group that's in power will say riot, but then a group that is fighting for their rights will say rebellion. And then a lot of the destruction of property, it's questionable if it's who's doing it, if it's police that are doing it, if it's provocateurs, if it's, you know, it's the more that I look at this imagery that I have, the more I'm starting to think about what's responsible to share, like, that I have to balance it out, that I can't necessarily just focus on the destructive aspect, because that might communicate the wrong message from the wrong people.
There's something about rendering those kinds of scenes in a painting that makes us think about them differently, or consider them perhaps on a deeper level than just seeing images in a newspaper. There's something about that, the eyes of the artist or the mind of the artist making that decision to record it in a painting, in this classical painting, that I think may cause us to engage more deeply. And I think that's one of the really incredible things that artists can that gift that artists can give to us in these really unusual and challenging and exciting and difficult times, is to give us that pause to think about how we think about these things and what our relationship is to those kinds of events.
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, I just want to add, like, I didn't even see my work going this way until January. Yeah.
I know what's interesting about, I just wanted to say, like, so we are all in kind of like the luxury goods business, right? So, I mean, you know, we sell things to people for money, for hopefully lots of money. I hope everybody sells things for lots of money. But you have this, Keith has this, like, I'm enjoying the conversation because I don't have the conflicts. You know, my work is abstract. You can't, you know, you're not going to know what it's about, so I can hide. But, you know, Keith is making paintings about protests. A lot of those protests are born out of inequality and inequity. And then, you know, we're selling that work for money. So it's a very complex thing that artists do, right?
Yeah.
I'm not making any accusation. It's interesting to me, right? Like,
and then I think if I sell 10 paintings, I have to donate a certain amount of that to the
well,
others, right?
To yourself and make more paintings. But I mean, it's you know, like Picasso painted Guernica and he was an asshole. But you know, you're right. Not that Keith is. I'm not trying to say that. But it's interesting to me, the conflict. Such a complex thought process, right? Because you're capturing something super important and you have nowhere to hide, you know? Like someone may want to see your booth and who's like more of a, say, a right-leaning person who loves your paintings or was going to buy, and now he sees this and maybe he's going to change his mind even though the quality of the art is high, very high, right? So it's very interesting to navigate that landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a new problem for me. It's not one that I've considered or had before. Yeah, like I'd avoided any kind of identity politics or political content in my work through art school and through showing the first couple times. But now, the more I look at like news images, the more I have to think, which is okay too. Yeah.
I'm wondering if Micah and Charlize, if you have any comment on how your work or your practice or your process is being affected by the events that are unfolding around us right now. Charlize, has your thought process changed or your work changed or even access to studio space?
Right now we don't actually, most of us don't have access to studio space, so we do make do. But then, you know, even me, I speak for myself, but I've seen it in us, in my other fellow artists, studio mates, we always make do. That's just part of our process itself. So we work in whatever different way. But for me, change my process about what's going on, I would have to say it does and it doesn't. It does in a sense, it's more to do with accessibility. Just because some of the tools, some of the material are very specialized, and if everything's shut down, there's just no way of getting them, right? Even to produce anything except going back to analog, making 2D, 3D, smaller space that is not conventional material. And it doesn't really affect because my work in the background have always been sort of like the journey of the immigrants. With gender in the sense that about the woman role in the family and what it does and how invisible in some of these are in some of the current life that we live in, even though we're coming from a background of, you know, unfortunate, but then we made it, and then we're still very invisible. So in a sense, almost making me revisiting some of the stuff that I sort of been tuck away for a bit. I made stuff. I have lots of work that I actually make where I explore all those things, but then I kept it. I would never show it to anyone except a few. And I would actually have a thought, sort of like a process thought, reflection of change towards it before I actually show someone or something about it. So yeah, so it does make me go back and think and sort of reflects and make adjustment if it needed. But so I really kind of sort of like it does and it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How about you, Micah? It looks like you're in your studio, which is great. How are the current events making you think differently about your work in terms of ideas or process?
Well, I think for everybody, as soon as it started, it's definitely a really reflective time. Like, not just artists, but all individuals, I think, are like maybe looking at their own lives, and maybe you know, down the line we'll see evidence of that, or maybe some changes. But in terms of my personal studio practice, I think I have tennis elbow, and I've been trying not to do any work. Mm-hmm. So maybe compounded on that is also I'm in my home studio apartment, and it's been hard to not work, but I'm really trying to like do other things, maybe observe or absorb what's happening around me more than just working, and trying to rest my arm. I was really glad that the jewelry community, two jewelry artists, started a project called the Hand Metal Project, which I'm really excited about. Like, that was something that I was really almost like proud that I found out about it and that I can participate in it, hopefully.
What's that project about?
Charlize, you may know about this as well.
Yeah.
But so basically the jewelry community, it's like a global campaign to try and make hand medals, almost like awards, that in a few months' time will be given to frontline healthcare workers. So this is a chance for basically, while everything is shut down, for anyone who is an artist, a jewelry professional, or a student to then produce as many medals as they can, and then donate them to this this cause. So I was really excited when that happened, just because it felt more connected to what was happening and more responsive to what was going on. But right
And
now,
that's a very direct connection to what's happening in the world. And I did want to ask you, you know, being an artist can be a pretty solitary undertaking at the best of times. And with things being locked down, I was interested to find out from each of you, like how you're managing and how you're kind of keeping your mental health robust or not, and how you're staying connected with other artists in the outside world. And I know the online community can help with that a lot. But Micah, it sounds like there's like a really tangible project that you're working on. Are there any other ways that you're staying connected with people during the lockdown?
Nothing that specifically comes to mind. I guess I haven't. Yeah, anyone else can jump in.
Yeah, Charlize, how are you staying connected to your fellow, especially now you're usually accustomed to working at Harbourfront where you're surrounded by other creative people, and now you're not. How's that going for you, and how are you staying in touch with people?
Yeah, we don't have a regular schedule meeting by any means, but Melanie, director at a craft and design studio, and Jillian as well. They do send out weekly, if not more than 2 or 3 times per week of information and communication within each other, within the studio mates. We also could communicate already online. For me, I find online it's so good for these timing, because I would check out Instagram of what my fellows people are doing, and I would tag them, and then we will encourage each other, right? So that's sort of the form. But I think right now everyone is just so overwhelmed with many things that it's like we don't want to always talk about work or this particular or that particular. So it's like it's almost like we try when we can, but talking about the metal project, it's great. You get assigned a number to put on the little hand that you make, and then you send it to they call it hand keeper of every region. So our region is Paul Mcker. He's a professor at Church Brown, and so we would give the medal to Paul, and I'm assuming that the medal we given to frontline heroes who actually work and receive this medal. But I thought that was such a wonderful project because it directly kind of like contribute to mental health and letting them know that we too appreciate what they're doing. I mean, I can say it, but I can actually visually, physically make something to show it.
And I think that's a really beautiful connection between two professions that may not regularly have points of intersection.
Yeah.
Keith, you talked about creating this studio, a fitness or a martial arts studio in your space. That sounds like a great way to kind of keep physically and mentally fit. Are there other ways that you're staying connected with your community of makers?
Phone chat. That's been pretty much it. Yeah. Mostly just phone chat.
Do you usually work in a shared studio space or?
No, I work.
Home?
Yeah, I work at home.
I
actually, this is my family's house that I'm in, but they have another house in Ingersoll, and being a little bit older, they wisely got out of Dodge when it was looking like COVID was a big scary thing. So I've been here mostly just living with my girlfriend and slowly making the entire house into an art studio / fitness studio. It's a bit of a bubble that I'm living in right now. I don't think it's gonna necessarily be able to continue in its current form once things go back to normal. But that's been a huge blessing, having the space to use as I see fit. given that, you know, as a young artist, I don't have a lot of income. It's been great to have the space to work with, and make something out of. I mean, the biggest struggle when I'm here on my own is mental health, right? We gotta keep in a good enough place that we can be productive and not put too much pressure on ourselves to be productive. And of course, the community is a good thing, but honestly, online is no substitute for the real thing, for meeting people in person.
Yeah, I think that's true. I'm grateful for Instagram to stay in touch with people, but I'm really craving the experience of going to an actual art show in a gallery and talking to people. We're getting close to wrapping up, but Cal, maybe I'll just ask you, you're in Pittsburgh, so you're kind of in a new town. How are you staying connected with your community while you're locked down in maybe a slightly unfamiliar place?
Well, I'm fortunate in the sense that I've never, for good or bad, really collaborated, like I said earlier, or even, I mean, I have friends that are artists, but I only see them at the show, at the outdoor show. So my lifestyle hasn't changed much. We moved here a year ago. I've got my studio here. Apartment's a little ways away. So I just, same thing as that I've done for years and years. I get up, ride my bike to the studio. I'm here roughly from 11 till 9 every day, and then I go home. So there hasn't been too much of a change. Pittsburgh's a lot smaller than Toronto. It's a city, but it's a lot smaller. So it wasn't, and then compared to, I had a studio in Brooklyn up last year. There wasn't a lot of people on the street to begin with. So that shift is not as shocking, I think, as it has been in Toronto and larger cities. There weren't a lot of people out and about anyway. And connecting, I mean, that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this, was to connect with other artists. But from a studio practice perspective, I think that the fun has been that the scary part, because we're all trying to make a living. The scary part when it first happened was a couple of my shows, like, you know, shows in New York were canceled, art fairs were canceled, and that's how we make a living. You know, my wife does it full time, so we don't have any other source of income. So it was a little nerve-wracking at first, but she really upped her Instagram game, and so we're getting sales through that, which is great. But it was actually a relief, to be honest with you. She's the business end of it, so she was far more nervous about the bills and stuff. For me, I was like, sweet, I don't have to, like, I've done shows consistently, 4 shows. We're in Miami every year for like years. So I was like, yay, I don't have to get ready for a show. I don't have to think about selling or making art to sell. That's where the new work came out of. I'm just buying weird fluids I don't know anything about, and they're melting stuff. And so it actually had a positive effect. The isolation, meaning I didn't have a schedule. It was almost like I was in summer vacation as a kid. So for me, it's been great. Connecting wise, it's hard to connect online. We're doing it well, I think, here. For me, it's really great, maybe as more of a senior artist in this group, to hear how these guys are doing what they're doing and how they're coping. And I can say that, you know, we talk about mental health, right? I'll give you a little marketing on that. We don't have mental health issues. Artists have mental wealth issues, right? Like we have a preponderance of wealth as artists. There's a lot going on in an artist's head, a lot. And for younger artists, you don't even know yet. 50-year-old like me, and you're like, oh, can I stop thinking for a minute, you know? So the challenge is to discipline the kind of wild dogs that are your creative brain, right? So for Micah, he's taking a bit of time off. There's different ways of doing it. I think they're all valid. For artists, I think you've got to be a little off in the first place to do this job. Like, I don't really think we're normal people. So I have friends that are normal and they're great, and they just think I'm nuts. So I
think that's almost a great way to wrap things up, folks, that we we embrace our uniqueness and weirdness and creativity. And I really, on behalf of my fellow jurors and of the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair, I want to thank you so much for coming together in this format. I didn't get through even half the questions. You've been so generous in sharing your stories and your creativity and your experiences. Thank you so much. And I hope that you've had as much fun as I have. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Good luck to everybody.
Awesome.
Stick with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. I want to thank you, everyone, again. Thank you, Lee, for hosting this panel. And thank you to the artists for participating today. Please be sure to check out the Toronto Outdoor Art Fair website at www.torontooutdoor.art for more information on these artists and all the other artists we have. And thank you so much for coming. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it. We'll see
Thanks,
you at the
Lee.
show.